Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Steve Clemons.
Greetings, everybody. How is everyone? So we're going to jump into the Middle East now. We're going to look at the diplomacy of one of the primary actors, most important actors, not only in the Middle East, but I would argue globally. Please welcome to the stage Anwar Gargash, diplomatic advisor to the President of the United Arab Emirates. A good friend. Anwar, let's have a round of applause.
Thank you.
I'm just going to start for a moment. I want to have a seat. I want to start for a moment. I have, various, I would call them mentors, inspirations in U.S. foreign policy. Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Brent Scowcroft, and I'm never nice to anyone, but I do want to say that Anwar Gargash is a bit of all three. What I'm basically talking about is a serious strategist, not just someone who's in his job operating through inertia, but we have an opportunity to have a conversation. I'll encourage you with Slido, we all have Slido, we're all getting to know Slido, to pose questions that I think get at the question of what the future is going to look like and what we're going to sculpt with the hard choices we have ahead. But to do that first, Anwar, it's great to see you again.
First of all, I'm humbled by the comment, but flattery will get you everywhere.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. Well, let me just start for a moment about the present we're in.
Yeah.
I was with you in India at the Raisina Dialogue, Samir Saran's gathering, and Jaishankar, the Indian foreign minister. And you did something I had never seen you do before. You offered a genuine olive branch to Iran and said this can be a very different situation. And I had a feeling, wow, the region is acquiescing to a different set of possibilities around Iran. We have a hot, kinetic conflict exploding right now between Iran and Israel. We have the United States saying it doesn't back what Israel is doing. At the same time, Donald Trump is sort of now taking credit for what Israel is doing and using it as a hammer. So can you help us understand this moment? Is it a dire moment, or is it one that is what I would call a kabuki act?
No, I think it's a dire moment. I think it's definitely a dire moment. I want to just start. I mean, again, when you mentioned that we offered an olive branch for Iran, I think the main thing is the region has, and continues actually, the region continues to suffer from this sort of forever war, continuous conflict, etc. And we do need to break that cycle. So I think the idea basically is within our foreign policy, the sort of bridges re-established with Iran were at the same time that we were also signing the Abrahamic Accords.
Right.
So the idea basically was we sort of reconfigured how the UAE should operate as an important player, but not a sole player in the region, and to start building bridges throughout, in the Arab world, outside, within the region, and of course, as you reestablish bridges with Iran, you also build new bridges with Israel.
Right.
I think
you're the bridge in the middle.
Trying to be, yes, trying to be in many ways. And I think in the beginning, many people understood the Abrahamic Accords that this was some sort of new alignment against Iran, and there was so much, editorial on this. On this subject, and we made sure that this had nothing to do with realignment against Iran. This was genuinely a relationship to break stereotypes within the Middle East. So that, I think, is the important perspective. The important perspective is, after 10 years of the Arab Spring, it was time for the Arab bridges, more or less. So to establish cooperation, to find ways, etc.
So but let me just interrupt. So how do you see this moment then? I want to tell our audience, you are the person who carried the letter from President Trump to Iran's foreign minister that started this whole, background negotiation directly between the United States and Iran. So it's a high-stakes dialogue, apparently hit a stall, but you were part of the initiation of this process, and so you're clearly in touch with the Iranians. Is there a prospect that we get somewhere decent out of this, or do you think Iran will back up and
I think also we have to give credit to President Trump. I mean, President Trump sort of started these negotiations again. We were all hopeful that these negotiations will actually be successful. We all understood that there was basically a major problem in the negotiation, and this was the issue of enrichment. We understood that this was center stage at these negotiations. But at the end of the day, I mean, diplomacy is about dealing with difficult issues. And diplomacy is about a process. And diplomacy is about finding a way. And it's always more difficult, but the cost of diplomacy is much, much, less than the cost of a confrontation war. I mean, today as we see terrible pictures really from Iranian cities and from Israeli cities, you understand that war has its own logic and has its own momentum. And it's not a good momentum. So in a way, as you start a war, when do you end it? Is there an exit? Is there, or does it change into a second phase?
Right.
Is there another phase? So I think from this perspective, going back to the original question, yes, these are dire consequences. We are concerned about where this will go, and our foreign minister, who happens to be on a visit now to the United States and Mexico, was in continuous consultation. He called the Iranians, he called many of the other Arab foreign ministers. Will definitely reach out to the Israelis and with the view of de-escalation.
So let me ask you something. I want to ask you to kind of take your UAE hat. Imagine you're a really smart strategist, maybe in the Maldives or Finland or something like that. You're outside the zone of interest, and you're watching something that happened, which is the President of the United States just made a trip to the Middle East, and he visited UAE, Qatar, Saudi, and did not go to Israel. No. And there was a lot of hoopla about that decision not to go. President Trump very publicly said to Israel, don't attack Iran. It's not in our interest to attack Iran. Now there seems to be a shift in the president's rhetoric in this. So I guess my question to you is, has Israel made a strategic choice for the United States that the United States can now not disown, can't be as distant as he tried to be in a way of separating Israel, Gaza from the broader engagement with the Middle East? I'd love to see without your UAE hat, if you were observing this, what would be the lessons you would draw?
Well, again, I'm not going to speak for the United States or Israel.
Yeah, but you saw a pattern there, right?
I'm going to speak as a regional voice.
Right.
And I think as a regional voice, we have seen this over and over again. We've seen the idea that conflicts can be resolved through a military operation or operations, and then we have seen that it does not resolve issues. It complicates issues, and the exit becomes very difficult, and sometimes it's a protracted conflict. And this is what worries me right now. I think what worries me right now is the stability of the region, and the stability of Iran is important for the stability of the region. We understand that there are serious issues that have to be tackled, and these issues that have to be tackled are to do with nuclear proliferation in the region, and this is important to all of us. But we simply don't think that military confrontation is the right tool and the right approach to do that, regardless of how serious the issues are, and the issues are serious. So I think from that perspective, it's extremely important to do that. Again, I want to say that from our perspective in the UAE, I think we've seen this time and again. In the last few years, we've approached various countries, including Iran, including Israel, etc., with the idea really of what I would call a regional view, of a more economic regional view of areas of cooperation for the region, etc. And I think in both Tehran and Tel Aviv and other areas, Ankara and many Arab capitals, we can see that there is a yearning for that. There is a yearning for how can we change this sort of narrative of conflict into a narrative of cooperation? How can we change the confrontation into areas where we can all benefit as countries? We're all cognizant that the world is moving at different speeds, and the Middle East is moving at a much slower speed, except certain areas or oases of thinking. And I think this can't continue. And for you to do that and to start yet another conflict, I think it throws us back many years back.
So I'm going to ask you about how you look, your strategic dashboard, Anwar, when you look at other great powers in the world. So you're clearly engaged in the United States, but we saw China engaging in a new form of diplomacy and normalizing between Saudi and Iran and yourselves. We've seen Russia, and you have, I think, a remarkably better. Well, President Trump has a good relationship with Vladimir Putin, but you have a structural relationship with Russia, which is deeper than ours. You were in India. You see this. How do you see other great powers in this moment when it looks at the street? Who's rising? Who's falling? And where are you putting your bets?
Well, again, I think let me start with President Trump's visit to the Gulf. I think it's a good starting point. I see that visit as a very successful visit. But I think it sends several messages that we have to all be aware of. I think the first message is that the global order post-1945 is definitely changing. Slowly but surely it's changing. And
slowly, it seems quickly to me.
In some areas, yes, in some other areas, no. But I think this is something that we see, and I hear this also from many European friends and colleagues and others who visit. They're also aware of that. So there is also, a lot of soul searching, let's say, in European conversations there. I think the second thing is our concern following the Obama policy of a pivot to Asia is I think, is perhaps being addressed by this visit. So there is a pivot to Asia, but there are also strategic American interests in the Gulf and in the Middle East. Many of these interests are not necessarily the same old interests of security and energy, but many of these interests are also about investment now and about technology and how investment in technology can be also another driver. I think the third thing also is if you look at President Trump's decision on Syria. So the decision making now,
which was a huge decision.
Which was a huge decision.
Were you in favor of him?
I think overall the decision is good. I mean, overall the decision is good.
Just for the audience, it's directly engaging. He had a lot of counsel not to directly engage and to meet
directly engage
the new president of Syria.
Directly engage and lift sanctions on Syria and give the new regime a fighting chance, let's say, among various things. But there are also asks on this area. So I think all this area reestablishes America as a major player in our area. So America, even though President Trump has more of a nationalist
Are you
foreign
comfortable
policy.
with the new Syria? I mean, UAE has been probably the staunchest opponent of Muslim Brotherhood networks, and Muslim Brotherhood networks are often defined very expansively to mean a lot of the more radical elements of that, which were clearly part of the leadership in New Syria.
I think.
So, are you calm about that, or are you worried?
No, I think we are very realistic and rational about it. So, on the one hand, we think engagement is extremely important, and to try, but at the same time, there are certain asks of the new regime, which are to do with minorities and which are to do with foreign fighters. I think this is something we share with a lot of our Arab, European, and American friends on it. So basically, as you support the transition in Syria, following, I don't know, 10, 11, 14 years of war. You also at the same time give them a fighting chance, but at the same time, there are concerns that have to be raised about foreign fighters and this. But let me come back to your basic question. I think up to now, and I've said this many times, from where I sit, I see a China that is more political from Pakistan eastward and more economic from Pakistan westward. So clearly, up to now, China is one of our largest trading partners. I mean, the UAE's largest trading partners are three. It's the EU, it's China, and it's India. And you're talking about, you know, figures of the $50 billion and every year, etc. So from that perspective, I think the Chinese are somebody that we need to deal with, and we need to establish our relationship. So clearly, for us, it is important to have, you know, a future-oriented relationship with the EU. I mean, recently we signed with France, for example, a $40 billion deal with the French to establish an AI campus. So that AI campus will involve American giants coming in. We will be one of the players. The French also will be.
Now, Elon Musk and Vladimir Putin says, you know, that nation that controls AI controls the future. So are you going to control the future?
No, I think we want to be in the same, you know, train coach where the future is moving. We want a seat there. I mean, there are like 15 seats, 20 seats. We want to be one seat there. We shouldn't really think of the Middle East only as a crisis area. And I think what the UAE policy is focused on is not to reduce the Middle East to the word crisis, but to also look at the Middle East and think there are opportunities.
It's going to be a huge campus.
And this leads me again to the issue of condemning the Israeli attack on Iran.
Right.
This is not the sort of Middle East we want. This is not the sort of region that we want where crises are being, or are the attempt to resolve crisis is through an air force or through missiles or through militias and so on and so forth. You know,
you have said, and others have said, that really I don't want to get deep in it because there are other things I want to ask you, but about two-state solution is still required. Many analysts that I know with Israel and Gaza just say there's no possibility of that any longer. What is the realist Anwar Gargash view on the Gaza crisis, Israel-Gaza, what has to be resolved? You know, when we think about the potential of Saudi normalization with Israel, and they've, you know, Mohammed bin Salman has been very clear that it requires, you know, a different path for Gaza. What's your view?
Well, I think right now the first thing we need to do is we need to address the humanitarian issue in Gaza. And, you know, we have an Emirati hospital, field hospital in Gaza we have established.
Has it been bombed?
No, it hasn't. Because, again, we have taken Israeli permission to establish that hospital. But I think up to now it has seen more than 40, 50,000 cases. So that hospital is doing something.
Yeah.
We have desalination plants there that we have established, mobile desalination plants. So we're trying to do everything we can. I think the priority in Gaza today is not to use food as a weapon. And the priority in Gaza today is to address this humanitarian situation. I mean, this is, you know, this was a large prison, and now this prison has become into
is Israel
a
hearing that
humanitarian
from
catastrophe. Sorry?
Is Israel hearing that from you?
Bits and pieces. Bits and pieces. I mean, they hear us, but also at the same time, they are willing to cooperate on certain things. For example, the access that we've had on humanitarian, but I think in other areas, not necessarily. But I think it is also important for Israel to hear Arab voices that actually want stability in the region,
right,
but at the same time, stability within the Palestinian-Israeli area has to conclude with a functional Palestinian state, an independent functional Palestinian state. And I think this is very important.
So let me ask you a question on, this is a complicated question, but you just met the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Andrei Sybiha, and he thanked the UAE for your humanitarian assistance, for being involved with POW exchanges and being involved. We had yesterday the Prime Minister of Serbia here, who also made his first trip to Ukraine recently, has been there, but didn't sign the Odessa. I'm interested in the role that's someone playing in the gray area of relationships? How do you not get involved and get held to a zero-sum game between Russia and Ukraine? How can you have positive engagement with Ukraine and still have positive engagement with Russia without being an enabler of bad things?
Well, I think with difficulty to start with. I think number one is when the crisis, just looking, for example, let's start with the presence of Ukrainians and Russians in the UAE. We've got about 20,000 Ukrainians living in the UAE. We've got 40,000 Russians living in the UAE. So this also indicates that, we can actually play a role, rather than being for and against. I mean, again, I think number one is we have to be very sympathetic with the European view about European security and what the invasion of Ukraine means for the whole European mindset. I think we have to be very sympathetic with that. But it does not mean that we have to line up in one position against the other position. I think, again, the Europeans have an independent view on issues in our region, and they don't have to line up with and against. So I think as we recognize that they don't take a with and against position in our region, we will not also take a with and against position in things that are important to them. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think we have been very active. We have, in prisoner exchanges, there are about 14,000. There's been about 4,000, I think, prisoners that have been exchanged through the good offices of the UAE between Russia and Ukraine. We have signed, even in time of war, we have signed a free trade agreement with Ukraine, because the whole idea is to look at the future relationship of Ukraine. So I think the fundamental question that when the crisis began, the war began, the fundamental question was, do we become just another with or against?
Right.
Or do we actually try and play a constructive role by building that relationship, while also in our voting, etc., maintaining also the tenets of international law, etc.
Right.
So I think this has been our thinking. It's strategic autonomy. The UAE's foreign policy will be about strategic autonomy for a country our size, wherever we can and wherever we can help. So wherever we can help, we will be there. We will be a conduit. We will try and be a bridge. We will try and help. But we will always work with partners. I don't think we suffer from a hubris. So we will always be a partner, find the right partners and work.
Real quick, yes or no, this is from Slido. Was President Trump's decision to withdraw from the JCPOA a strategic miscalculation?
Well, I think this is history right now. But I think at the end of the day, we want these negotiations to continue. We want to find a political solution. I know it's very difficult now that the war has already started, but I think, again, wars will not resolve issues. It's very difficult to have an exit strategy once you start a war, and I think classically you've got Gaza, you've got Ukraine, you've got a crisis in Asia, and all these areas. So again, I urge everybody to push on the de-escalation, to push for the end of this war swiftly, and to try and find a diplomatic pathway.
Right. So you got 40 seconds, but we have a lot of great questions. Sorry, I wish we could get to all of them. But I'm going to take the GCC question about an alternative power base to the EU to piggyback on that and ask you, we have a lot of people here from Europe looking at their future strategically. President Trump is drawing lines differently than the past. And when I think about one of the biggest changes in global foreign policy topography, it's U.S. strategic contraction from some places, focus on others. What would be your advice and counsel to an EU that needs to figure out what its new North Star in strategy should be?
Well, I mean, again, I think vis-a-vis the relationship with America is very central, I think, to us and to the EU. So I think even if that relationship, the shape of the relationship changes, that relationship is extremely important and essential, even in a changing world. So that would be the first thing. I think the second thing is, you can see in the current American approach, it's less institutional and more problem-solving approach. Now, whether it works or not is a different thing. So I think the idea actually of trying to find fresh new ways to tackle issues is extremely important.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause and thanks. My thanks to Anwar Gargash. I also want to mention that this session was done in cooperation with the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy, which you might be connected to. I want to ask everyone to stay in your seats, that we have an actual debate coming up just next on the Middle East peace puzzle. Anwar, thank you so much. Great to see you. Thank you very much. Thank you.